The day after I got fired, my cute neighbor's daughter made one phone call, and by the next morning, the billionaire next door had fired everyone who let it happen. My name's Jack Bennett, 34, an operations manager who spent 6 years showing up early and staying late. Walked out of my own office like a criminal over a crime I didn't commit. But the little girl next door, 5 years old with copper curls and a plastic walkie-talkie clipped to her overalls, saw me crying through my kitchen window and decided her Captain Jack was stuck like her sailboat once was. She wasn't supposed to make that call. She didn't understand what fired meant, didn't understand that her mother, Claire Whitfield, the widowed billionaire who built a logistics empire from her garage, held 40% of the contracts of the very company that had just thrown me out. But this cute little girl made one phone call anyway, and that single call from a child too young to know the rules was about to bring down an entire chain of people who thought no one was watching. So why would a billionaire fire everyone over one man's firing? What did that little girl say that made her powerful mother go still at her own kitchen table? And why had I spent 2 years too scared to knock on the door of the woman who was about to change my whole life? It started at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. I remember the time because I was checking the clock when Gordon Pierce appeared in my doorway and said the words, "Jack, they need you in the big conference room." He didn't look at me when he said it. That was the first thing that felt wrong. I walked down the hall past desks I'd sat at for 6 years. Somebody's radio was playing low. Someone had brought donuts. Normal Tuesday. And then I opened the conference room door and saw 2 people from HR sitting on one side of the table with a folder between them. And I knew, the way you know a step is missing in the dark, that my whole life was about to fall. "Have a seat, Jack." I didn't sit. "What's this about?" The woman slid a paper across the table. My name was on it. My login. My signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It was a printed name on an expense report for a client account I had never once touched in 6 years. "These figures were falsified," she said. "The amounts were routed to an outside vendor. It's your login, Jack. It's your authorization." The room went very quiet. I could hear the air conditioning. I could hear my own heart. "I don't have access to that account," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me because inside I was falling. "I've never had access to that account. Pull the permissions. Pull the timestamps. I wasn't even in the building that night. We've made our decision." For words. 6 years and for words. I want you to understand something. I wasn't angry first. First I was confused, the way you're confused when someone speaks to you in a language you almost understand. I kept waiting for someone to ask me a question, to ask where I was, to ask if I did it. Nobody asked. That was the part that broke me. Not being fired, but being erased without a single person turning to me and saying, "Jack, what's your side?" They gave me a cardboard box. They watched me fill it. A coffee mug with a chipped handle. A photo of my late father. A little league schedule I'd taped inside my drawer. And then 2 men I'd shared elevators with for 6 years walked on either side of me down the length of the office, past every desk, past the donuts, past 12 people who suddenly found their computer screens very interesting. Nobody said goodbye. Nobody said, "This is wrong." They just watched the man they'd called a friend at Christmas parties get walked out like a thief. I made it to my car before my hands started shaking. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes because I didn't trust myself to drive. And the worst thought, the one that kept circling, wasn't how could they do this? It was how am I going to pay for anything now, followed by the line I knew would appear on every job application for the rest of my life. Terminated financial misconduct. Guilty. Without a trial. Without a question. I drove home to my small blue house on a quiet cul-de-sac, and I carried that box inside, and I set it on the counter, and the house was so silent I could hear the refrigerator hum. I'm not a man who cries easily. My dad raised me not to, but I sat down at that kitchen table as the light went orange and then gray outside my window, and I put my head in my hands, and for the first time since I was a kid, I let it come. I didn't know the window was open. I didn't know that next door, in a house twice the size of mine, a 5-year-old girl in butterfly pajamas was standing at her own window with a glass of milk, watching the sad man who'd taught her to ride her bike put his head down like her whole world had just gotten too heavy to hold up. Her name was Rebecca, and she had a plastic walkie-talkie clipped to her pajamas, the twin of one sitting forgotten in my junk drawer, a battery still alive inside it after 8 months. I'd given it to her as a joke the day I waded into a storm drain to rescue her toy sailboat. If your boat ever gets stuck again, I told her, you radio the captain. I'd forgotten all about it. She hadn't. I heard the crackle first. A burst of static in the dark, quiet kitchen, coming from a drawer I hadn't opened in months. I lifted my head. And then, through $12 of plastic and one stubborn 9-volt battery, came a small, serious voice that stopped my heart cold. Captain Jack, this is Rebecca. Do you copy? Your boat is stuck. Over. I sat there in the dark with that little plastic radio crackling in my hand, and I swear to you, that tiny voice did what 6 years of hard work couldn't. It made me feel like maybe someone in the world still saw me. Before I go on, do me one quick favor. If you haven't subscribed yet, tap that button now and turn on the notification bell. Because the way things go these days, this might honestly be the last time this channel ever shows up for you again, and I don't want you to miss how this one ends. Alright, back to that kitchen. I pressed the button. My thumb was actually trembling. Rebecca? I said. It's pretty late for a radio check, sailor. Mommy says you're sad, she said, ignoring every rule of radio in the world. Are you stuck like my boat was? And I couldn't lie to her. You can lie to HR. You can lie to yourself in a parking lot for 20 minutes. But you can't lie to a 5-year-old asking if you're stuck. Yeah, kiddo, I whispered. I think I am. There was a shuffle of static. A different sound came through. A hand taking the radio gentle. And then a voice I'd know anywhere, warm and low and careful. The voice of the woman I'd been too scared to knock on for 2 years. Jack? It's Claire. I'm sorry. She wouldn't let it go. Are you okay? Now let me tell you about Claire Whitfield. 2 years earlier, a moving truck had pulled into the driveway next door, and out stepped a woman carrying a sleeping toddler on one hip and a laptop bag on the other. And I remember thinking she looked tired in the bone-deep way that only single parents get tired. I didn't know yet that she'd built a logistics software empire from her own garage. I didn't know her husband had died in a car accident 3 years before, or that she flew to a different city almost every week while her daughter stayed with a nanny. I just knew she was my new neighbor, and I fixed her wobbly porch step the first weekend. Because that's what you do. Over 2 years I fixed her porch light, brought in her trash cans on windy nights, taught her daughter to ride a bike in my driveway while Claire watched from the steps with coffee going cold in her hands. We'd talk some evenings until it got dark. About nothing, about everything. And I'd walk back to my little house feeling lighter than I had all day. And every single time I told myself the same lie. A woman like that is out of reach for a man like you. Don't embarrass yourself. So I never asked. 2 years and I never once asked. And now here she was on a toy radio at midnight, asking if I was okay. I almost said I'm fine, but it had been the worst day of my life, and her voice was the first kind thing in it. I got fired today, I said. They said I falsified expense reports. I didn't do it, Claire. I don't even have access to that account. But nobody asked me. Nobody asked a single question. They just walked me out. The radio was quiet. But it was the kind of quiet where you can feel someone leaning in, really listening. Jack, she said. Come over. Bring whatever paperwork you have. I want to hear all of it. I sat on her back porch that night under a light I'd fixed with my own 2 hands, and I told her everything. The conference room, the signature that wasn't mine, Gordon Pierce standing in my doorway that morning, not meeting my eyes, the way 12 people watched me carry a cardboard box past their desks and said nothing. Claire listened without once interrupting, and when I finished she was very still for a long moment. Then she said something that changed the whole night. Jack, what was the name of your company again? Bennett and Cole Logistics. She went quiet in a way I felt in my chest. Jack, she said slowly. Bennett and Cole is one of my vendor partners. My company routes almost 40% of our regional shipping through them. I stared at her. I didn't know that. I swear I didn't know that. I know you didn't. And then something in her face shifted, the tired softness burning off, replaced by something sharp and focused, and for the first time I understood how a woman built an empire from a garage. But here's what I do know. I built my entire company on one rule. You verify everything before you trust it. And in 2 years, I never once looked at who I was doing business with next door to my own house. She looked at me. Send me everything tomorrow morning. Every email. Every login record. Every timestamp. I want to see this with my own eyes. I barely slept. At sunrise I sent her all of it, and by 10 o'clock that morning my phone rang. "Jack?" Claire said, and her voice was different now. Quiet, coiled, the voice of someone staring at proof. "The report that got you fired was submitted at 9:47 on a Thursday night, under your login. I told you I was at your nephew's little league game. I know, because your company fleet app was still tracking your car, and it puts you 40 minutes away at 9:47 exactly." She paused. "Jack, it wasn't you. Someone used your login remotely. And I think I know who, because I've been pulling the vendor records all morning, and there's a pattern here going back 18 months. Somebody's been skimming money and routing it to an outside trucking company. And the moment an audit got close, they needed one person to blame. Fast." My mouth went dry. "Who owns the outside trucking company? Claire?" And I heard her breath catch on the other end of the line. I heard her go completely, utterly still at her own kitchen table, the way a person goes still when a lie finally shows its whole ugly shape. "Jack," she said quietly, "you are not going to believe whose name is on it. It's Gordon Pierce," she said. "The man who stood in your doorway that morning and couldn't look you in the eye. The trucking company skimming the money. It's owned by his brother-in-law." I had to sit down on my own kitchen floor, because it all clicked at once, the whole ugly machine of it. 18 months earlier, Gordon had come to me and asked to borrow my login, just once, for a system update. I said yes, because that's who I was, the guy who says yes, who fixes the porch light, who wades into the storm drain. And he'd kept it. He'd used my trust like a key to a door he planned to rob, and when the auditors got close, he unlocked that same door and shoved me through it to take the fall. 6 years of my life, traded away to save a man who couldn't even look at me. But here's the thing about pointing a lie at an innocent person. It only works if nobody powerful is watching. And Gordon Pierce had made one mistake he never saw coming. He'd framed the man who lived next door to a billionaire who owned 40% of his company's business. Claire didn't call as a neighbor. She called Bennett and Cole's owner directly, as the single largest client he had, and she asked him one simple question. Why was an innocent employee walked out like a criminal without one phone log being checked? By Friday, Gordon Pierce was gone, terminated and handed to prosecutors. But it didn't stop there, because Claire kept asking the question nobody wanted to answer. Who else knew? And one by one they fell. The manager who'd rushed my firing to protect his own numbers. The HR head who'd signed off without pulling a single record. 2 supervisors who'd seen the pattern for months and stayed silent because speaking up felt dangerous. 5 people in the end. 5 people who'd chosen their own comfort over one honest man. All cleared out of that building in a single week, because a 5-year-old with a walkie-talkie radioed the captain. On Monday evening, there was a knock at my door. Claire stood on my porch with Rebecca on her hip and an envelope in her hand, and the porch light I'd fixed for her glowing gold above them both. Full apology. Back pay. Your record wiped clean, she said, holding out the envelope. But I didn't come here for that. She took a breath, and for the first time since I'd known her, the unshakable woman who built an empire looked nervous. I'm rebuilding how my company handles vendors. I need someone who actually checks the details instead of trusting a signature. Someone honest. I want that to be you, Jack, Director of Vendor Operations. Reporting straight to me. I stared at that envelope, then at her, at the woman I'd wanted to knock on for 2 years and never had the courage to. Claire, I don't know what to say. Say yes, she said, and then quieter with Rebecca tugging her sleeve. And maybe, say yes to dinner too, just the 2 of us this time. I've been too scared to ask you that for about 2 years. I laughed, a real one, the first in days. Funny, I said. I've been scared to ask you the same thing for exactly that long. And Rebecca, 5 years old, walkie-talkie still clipped to her overalls, utterly unbothered by the fact that she just brought down 5 grown adults, looked up at both of us and announced, I fixed the boat. You really did, sailor? I told her, and my voice cracked. You really did. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with it for a second. Have you ever been the person who fixes everyone's porch light? The one who always says yes, who always shows up, and quietly wondered if anyone would ever show up for you? Because I lived 34 years believing the answer was no. And it took a heartbroken little girl with a plastic radio to prove me wrong. 6 months later, I was standing in Claire's kitchen on a Sunday morning, flipping pancakes while Rebecca ran a plastic sailboat across the floor on a rescue mission of enormous importance. And Claire leaned against the counter watching us both with a look I'd waited 2 years to see. I'd taken the job. I'd taken her up on dinner, and a second dinner, and by spring I'd stopped calling my own house anything but next door. Because most nights I wasn't in it. And that morning, before the pancakes were even done, I got down on one knee on that kitchen floor. No restaurant. No speech. Just the three of us and a batch of pancakes burning on the stove. Rebecca looked at me kneeling there and asked, dead serious, "Does this mean Captain Jack lives here now?" Claire laughed so hard she was crying before she even said yes. I learned something that year I'll carry the rest of my life. I spent so long believing that people like Claire were out of reach for people like me that I never noticed she'd been standing on her own porch every single evening, waiting for me to be brave. Claire learned that the person worth trusting isn't always the one with the biggest title. Sometimes it's the one fixing your porch light for free, just because it's right. And Rebecca learned the simplest, truest lesson of all. When someone you love is stuck, you don't wait for a grown-up to notice. You radio the captain. If the story moved you even half as much as it moved me telling it, do me a favor and hit that like button. It's the only way this channel keeps telling stories like Jack and Rebecca's. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Jack's shoes? And do you think that little walkie-talkie earned a permanent place on the mantle? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.